So this is an interesting one, isn't it? That you've raised there that there are legislative differences between the US, Europe, and the UK, and Australia as well. I'm going to throw those guys in there as well down in the Southern Hemisphere. So you do have these different regulations, which I know about this because shipping supplements to the UK is different to selling supplements in the UK. They've got the FDA. They have different sets of rules, some of which are more intense, some of which are a bit less lackadaisical. I suppose my question here, Robert, is it legislatively, is it a case of generally legislation is more intense in the US than it is in, say, Europe and the UK? Or is it the other way around? I'm just kind of curious which one's easier to ship to.
I feel like US is a little more intense than UK.
Mm-hmm.
Europe and Europe. I think regulation in Europe and UK is largely sort of on par.
Mm-hmm.
But US, in some respects, is a little more intense. But it's also in all of those four, right? Europe, UK, Australia, actually New Zealand, US. It's actually generally pretty easy compared to everywhere else in the world, right? So they're all sort of declaration based, right? So it's all what you declare kind of is taken as the basis versus, let's say, Middle Eastern countries or Asia, where you have to have like a whole sort of proof of everything, right? From the declared value has to be based on actual purchases versus like a declaration and things like that. So in some respects, they're all pretty easy. In others, if you're shipping, I guess again it depends whether you're shipping supplements or things that are under a certain value and under de minimis rules versus larger items, which typically tends to be more expensive and typically tends to be commercial clearance. They tend to require commercial clearances. With commercial clearances, you have to comply with all the government requirements, right? Because you do actually go through those declarations, those processes. De minimis in the United States, at least, and to some extent in Europe as well, if you fly under de minimis, you fly under radar, essentially, because other government agencies don't actually check.
Right.
If you're shipping like a parcel, it's considered a personal, it's going to an individual, it's a personal parcel. FDA actually doesn't look at it, which is good for the brand, bad for the American consumer because, you don't know what you're putting in your body.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it kind of depends on, are you under de minimis or above de minimis, right? That's the biggest, I guess, differentiator, whether compliance is an issue or not.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. In the early days, we used to ship from Jersey in the Channel Islands, for those of you who don't know, Jersey is a small island off the north coast of France, which is kind of independently British. And we shipped from Jersey to the UK and to Europe, and there was no sales tax if the product was like under 20, I can't remember what it was. Let's say it was £20. If the value was under £20, you didn't have to pay the sales tax, which in the UK is 20%. So that's a lot of money, right? You're saving instantly. And so what we used to do was actually it was cheaper. And I don't know if this works when you multiply it out, Robert, maybe but when it was cheaper, or it was cheaper to send out 3 parcels, but all under £20 than one parcel with a value of £60 because of the VAT savings versus the cost of shipping, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And we've a lot of brands do this kind of optimization. You even hear, that it was pretty shocking to discover that that's actually done is, if you go to a retail chain, let's say Nordstrom's in the United States. Now, I don't know if Nordstrom actually does this, but this is, similar retailer. You could go and buy, let's say, an expensive purse, right? And if it's let's say it's an $800 purse. If you go to Nordstrom and it's in stock, and you get it off the shelf and you pay for it, you pay everything, right? Duties and taxes, everything's included in there. The sales tax calculated on top of it. But if they're out of stock and they ship it to you, right? You order it. You go in store and you're like, I like this person. Like, we don't have it, but we can order it for you, right? And they take your information and they ship it from their supplier overseas directly to you. Now that becomes a de minimis transaction because it's addressed to an individual, it's not addressed to Nordstrom, and it bypasses duties, it bypasses even sales tax at that point. Wow. Well, maybe not sales tax, but it does bypass the duties because now it's shipped from overseas. It's an international de minimis transaction to the consumer, handled by a large brand that just bypassed paying duties on the product, right? So these kind of optimizations, the very organized companies do this really well. And what's interesting in that example is that the consumer is none the wiser. The consumer doesn't actually get passed on the savings, right? Because they just paid the retail price that was in the store. So
that's really interesting. I'm thinking actually, like with subscription e-commerce, that's a really interesting strategy because you actually know what's getting shipped and when. So if you're shipping internationally and it's going to take a little bit longer to try and take advantage of those kind of rules, then I suppose you can plan a bit more ahead of time, right? So because I know in the UK there's such a large expectation on next day delivery because the country is so small, right? Why would you not get next day delivery? Of course, if I'm shipping from source, if I'm shipping from say China, then it's 5 to 6 days delivery. It's not next day. And so that I think you either do that on a subscription model where you can plan ahead of time with the dates, or you give, I suppose, the customer the option. If you want it next day, it's this much money. If you want it in 7 days, it could be a few pence less, maybe. I don't know. It's an interesting problem.
Absolutely. I think it's a very interesting problem. And I think all the pieces and the foundation is there to explore it, exploit, maybe not the good word for it, but optimize it, right? Optimize for the stuff. Because this is a strategy that could have a huge impact. Now, the example I always like to bring is, especially after COVID, but even now, if you go on let's say a brand website that sells, furniture, furnishings, let's say, none come to mind, but you select a couch, right? You like a couch, you select it, and they will give you 3 options. Actually, you'll say the colors that are available to ship immediately, colors that are available to ship in 7 to 10 days, and then everything below these 50 colors you can choose is going to take 2 months to get your product. And it's obvious, right? The ones that are shipping immediately, they have them in stock. The ones that are shipping in 7 to 10 days, it's inventory in transit. They know it's coming. It's not necessarily in stock, but they can trace it back to the SKU that's and the PO that's in transit. Yeah. And then everything else is essentially like you click this color, we're actually going to go manufacture this thing for you, right? And it's, it makes so much sense that it's broken down into these 3 categories and these 3 shipping timeframes because, not everybody urgently wants this couch, right? People would rather have the color they want. They don't care if it takes 2 months. So not, especially when you get into bulky items and more expensive items, the sort of instant gratification thing, it's a lot less prevalent than, say,
well, yeah, there's an expectation, isn't there, that it's going to take longer with a bigger, bulkier item just because of the shipping. Like I've just gone and ordered a new hob and it's going to take a week to get here, and you kind of, a week would be insane if it was a supplement, but because it's a hob coming from John Lewis, you kind of go, well, no, okay, it's big, it's bulky, we've got to arrange that, right?
So yeah, so with bulky, larger, expensive items, that's, I think, the expectations are different. With after COVID, especially, I think people are used to it, and you see more and more brands doing this with these different options, right? So I think it's become pretty common. People are used to it. It's not, it doesn't look weird. It doesn't look out of ordinary. It doesn't look to sort of diminish the brand's performance anymore. So I think it's definitely a great strategy to do that, especially if you can optimize for, cost, right?
It's a really great idea. I'm curious, Robert, because I don't know the answer. Now you've got my brain thinking now. It's dangerous, really. Let's say I'm shipping goods to the US, and the current level is $800, isn't it? I think the current de minimis level is $800. Now, is that $800 cost of goods, or is that $800 invoice value that the customer has paid?
It's invoice value, but with a nice kick to it. So you don't actually have to include the freight charges in it.
Okay, so invoice value less freight.
Yeah, so if you're charging if you're charging $790 plus you're charging $200 to ship it, that's not a $990 transaction. It's a $790 fall under the minimis shipping. Is broken out. US and Europe and UK are different in that US doesn't duty the freight. If I'm not mistaken, in UK you pay duty based on CIF value, which is basically cost of goods plus insurance plus freight. In the US, you take the insurance and freight out, so it's not considered cost of goods when customs looks at it.
Yeah.
So this is another thing that de minimis allows you to do, is basically, you break out the freight, whereas if you sold local inventory, your landed cost already includes all of that stuff, right? So your sell price is much higher, your sales tax is much higher, your everything's much higher.
That's really interesting. I'm going to go and investigate and have a little think about that, because that seems like an interesting idea. Like you said, I wouldn't be surprised if England charges more, because we like to tax everything to stupid levels in England. It's just the way it works.
And I mean, at 21%, that's a huge problem for international trade, because like international e-commerce, because you're selling something that's $10,000, it shows up at customers' country, and then they get a call and they're like, "Oh, you have to pay £2,000 in taxes," right? It could be quite the sticker shock.
Well, it is, and it's not even on smaller items. Like I've ordered a pair of trainers. I didn't realize they were actually shipping from the US, but they were. And I had to pay not only the import duty on those trainers, but I also had to pay UPS for handling the, do you mean that they shipped it? UPS charged me 20 some bucks just to handle the money. And then somebody else charged me some money, and I paid the value of the trainers again, which ironically didn't fit, but I couldn't send back. And so the whole thing was a nightmare. So, yeah, it's quite an extraordinary thing when you go through things like that. But it wouldn't surprise me, because welcome to Britain.